Okay, we started the recording and we're set to go, Chairman.
Okay, we'll call the City of Olivet Planning Community Design Commission agenda for October 1st, 2020 to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Rob Juggle,
Present.
Carol Wagner, Carol Wagner,
Hear us,
are
Carol?
you on mute?
Hello,
We can hear you now.
Are you present?
you all are fading in and out.
No. You know what you might try doing, Carol, is turning off your video if you're having connection problems. That might at least lock in, so you'll be able to still see the screen, as well as, help with the audio.
So Rob, you're fading, you keep fading in and out.
Try turning your video camera off.
I'm gonna try moving my machine, see if that helps.
Okay. While Carol's having some difficulties with connecting, why don't we go ahead and continue the roll call for everybody else?
Jody Rich, present. Richard Brophy,
Present.
Brian Lewis,
Present.
Michael Saunders,
Present.
and Tim Spiegelglass.
Present.
Carol, how are you? Are you present now?
I feel like I'm watching the Blair Witch Project.
Let's see if she can get settled. Carol, can you now hear us?
So
And are you present?
So Rob, I just heard you.
Yes, we were just finishing up roll call and we're just, calling for you to see if you're present. Can you hear us?
So I don't hear anything. Y'all are frozen.
Okay. Carlos, what do you think? You think Carol should maybe log in via the phone number? Is there a phone she could call into?
There should be a
Carlos should
number
be there.
available on the agenda for her to call, so I will send her, I'll call her separately and
The other thing we should probably try doing too is maybe just have her see if she can turn off her video. That might save a little bit on the, the rest of the transmission. Okay, while we're still trying to get, Carol on board, let's go ahead and let's let it also be known that Carlos Trejo, the Director of Planning and Community Development, is in attendance, as well as Jonathan Roper, the GIS coordinator, as well as our City Council person liaison, Missy Waldman. So with that being said, we typically would do public comments at this time. We'll let Carlos kind of continue on, but I'll go ahead and explain kind of the process. Typically with these Zoom meetings, we get better and better, but obviously there's always a little bit of technical difficulties that we kind of have to deal with. So we just try to roll with it. So be patient with us, everybody out in the audience. That would be great. The way this is going to go, we'll go through old business. We don't have any new business at this time, which is good because we got another pretty long, extensive discussion on that we'll have after old business. When we go through old business, there'll be a report that's presented by a member of the planning staff who will go through it. Address any of the issues, kind of summarize what happened during the previous meeting. At that point in time, we'll also take questions or comments from the applicant. And if there are any public comments related to it, please go ahead and put those down in your comments, or at least raise your hand so we can identify you to maybe bring you back onto the panel to identify yourself and identify any concerns. So the other thing too is when we go through public comments, if you have a public comment that's not related to anything on the business agenda, you can go ahead and list it down in the comments, or at the end of the meeting, we'll ask for if there's any more public comments that are there. So I will look right now while Carlos is busy just to see if there's anything listed in the Q&A, and I do not see anything. So let me just check the participants. I do not see any hands being raised. So that being said, we'll see if Carlos has gotten Carol set up. Carlos? Any luck, Carol?
He did reboot or go back in, so
Can you hear me?
yes, we can. Can you hear us, Carol?
Carol, can you hear us?
Okay, Chairman, I'm going to give her a call and I'm going to let Jonathan kind of operate. He's going to be introducing the next item. So,
Okay, we'll go ahead and continue on with old business, but we won't do a vote until we can at least talk to her or find out. Okay, so we'll go on to old business, which is item A. It's 9044 Watsonia Court. The petition type is a site plan, community design, and concept stormwater management plan review for a 2-story, 576 square feet enclosed accessory structure. The petitioner is Pamela Scott with the associates, and the property owner is Vamila Makari.
Mr. Chairman, before we get started, this is Mike. I'm going to recuse myself. So.
Oh, yes, I remember that. So thank you, Mike. Okay, let's see. Jonathan, can you either take Mr. Saunders off the panel?
Actually,
I don't know if it's required, but I know it's kind of the preferred method of what we do.
yeah, I believe Carlos is still actually the host and I'm not a co-host, so he would actually need to do
I
that.
think if we just keep Mike muted and not let him talk, we should be just fine. So let's go ahead and do that, okay?
And when Carlos gets off, I'll ask him to do that when he gets, or unless he
No worries.
Here.
No worries. That sounds great.
All right. So I'm going to, oh, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. He had the presentation open and I forgot to open it, so I apologize.
No worries. Just when I bragged about how good we were getting.
Here we are. All right. Okay, nope, I need to wait for Carlos. He's the host, so.
Carlos, are you back on? Do you hear us?
yes, yes, I can.
We need you to hand over controls to Jonathan too.
Jonathan, I did close the share screen
Oh, I'm not a co-host.
as a panelist, so okay.
The host disabled participant share screen.
Okay, you should be good now. Sorry about that, guys.
Awesome.
No worries.
Thank you, and good evening to the members of the Planning and Community Design Commission. My name is Jonathan Roper. I'm the Planner and GIS Coordinator for the City of Olivet here. And tonight on Old Business, we have a what once was considered a detached garage improvement or structure is now an actual residential addition, and we'll kind of go through that. At the last meeting, we introduced it was a 2-level detached garage, and it was considered an accessory structure. So it had a garage on the bottom, and on top it had a just one room over it with a staircase on the west side leading up. The reason why it was at the commission was 2 reasons mainly. One mainly was the height. Staff by right is permitted can only approve an accessory structure that is up to 15 feet in height or no more, no higher than the house. Secondly, the left elevation, it was basically it was just all siding for a building that tall and wide. It needed just a little more than just a blank wall. Also, where the placement was, where it was facing the neighbor, it needed a little bit more design to it. At the meeting, we discussed the height and how tall it would look or feel from the street, and the placement, and what concerns the neighbor to the east may have, because the house, the 9044 Watsonia and the house next door to the east shares a driveway, and the buildings are kind of close. So we were waiting to hear back from the neighbor, and the petitioner has reached out to them. So at this point, we received the revised plans. Oh, and one more thing.
Carlos speaking.
We discussed, Carlos, if you can mute yourself real quick. The other thing we discussed was to add windows to the left elevation, but also to see if there could be a connection between the buildings, which would place this under a residential addition rather than an accessory structure. So in the revised plans, you're seeing it in front of you. You have the original, which was 2 weeks ago, and the revised. So you can see the front really didn't change, but it's the left side elevation, which was blank, now has 2 windows, as the commission noted that they wish to see. There is the connection between the house, and there's actually an enclosure on one side, on the west side as well, that gives them a little bit more privacy as well. Also, so this is to scale, so you can see how from the front of the house, and that's relatively the street level, how I'm going to use my annotation on this, I'm sorry, spotlight. You can see where the street elevation is and how the grades drop. So this foundation's about 7 to 8 feet lower than the street here. So for one, it's not going to be as tall as the existing principal structure here. And 2, you can see the height difference between the addition component and the roof of the house. And you can see that on both sides as well, on the left side and the right side elevation. And under this, so there wouldn't be as this is now an addition, the height requirements are no more than 35 feet in height, because as an addition, a building cannot be more than 35 feet in height. So this would comply with zoning setbacks for the setbacks of the lot, as well as the height and bulk regulations. Here is the aerial of the property, so you can see that they always had plans to do some type of structure here, and they have the pad already sitting here for the detached garage, and here's that shared driveway there. It kind of you kind of can't see the driveway here with the shadow in a way, but they pull in and they go straight in here. And here's where the addition sits. So again, they're within the conformance of the setbacks. And here's a picture of the neighboring house and the proposed improvements on this site here, and where the property line is. So you can see where the neighbor is pretty, they're pretty close. They're even closer than the addition to the property line there. Let's see, and this slide is from last time again, as we, this is the old house, but as we just wanted to show where, what's on each side. So this side here is just to remind you of what the neighbor has on one side, and this is the other side, other street view. And at this point, I'll open up for questions or comments from the commission, and the petitioner is here this evening to answer any questions or comments that the commission may have.
Jonathan, do you have a picture of the back of the house with the, where it's been renovated? Just, or just something to show the other house, just for people who weren't at the last meeting.
Sure. And this, which would be on page 6 of 8 of your staff report. So the bottom picture, here's the front part here, and you get my annotation going. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, so here's the existing, this is the renovation that happened between 2014 and 15 that did go through PCDC as well. And you could see the neighbor and they're behind this tree in their car. This is the back of the house where if it's like if we are looking at the house, we are looking, if we would be at the place of the garage right now. So like where this is being taken from is from generally where that pad is going to be.
Great. Great. Okay. Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So does anybody on the commission have any questions or comments for Jonathan? I'm kind of scrolling. Was Carol able to join in? Oh, Mr. Brophy, go ahead.
I'm sorry, really quick question. Has there been, quiet. Has there been a change made so that there's now a connection? And would you mind explaining that?
Yes, sir. The connection, I'm going to switch back screens. The connection being made, I'm going to go to the site plan real quick. The connection being made begins on this side here, on the western side, and it actually extends towards the house here, and you can walk under it. So it is a roof area, and there is an enclosure on the outside here.
Is that, Jonathan, is that fully enclosed or is it just a covered walkway?
It's not fully enclosed, so like it's not, I mean, elements can get in there, wind and everything. And it's not, I'm going to zoom in a little bit.
It's only closed on one side. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And is that, this is just a point of clarification for me. Do we consider that connected? What is the minimum amount that we consider for something to be connected and not an accessory structure?
That really, it's
a vague.
That's an outstanding question in a way. There has only been a few petitions that have had as an accessory structure that had any connection. So different than we only had about, I would say 3 maybe that actually had this type of connection. And Usually it's been via a breezeway, but it's usually a roofed area that is structurally a part of each component.
Okay. The reason I ask is not because I have a significant concern or a specific concern about this, but just, what if someone puts a planter and says, oh, look, they're connected by this planter. Are we going to decide as a group that as long as there's a roof there or a roof in one side, or what criteria are we going to use to call something attached?
I'm sorry, when you say a planter, like on the ground or?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I guess taken to its extreme, how far are we going to allow people to go to get around the accessory structure limitations? So you could imagine someone coming in and saying, hey, we've got a planter that's only 1 foot off the ground, but it's connected to the main house and connected to the garage, so therefore this isn't an accessory structure. I'm trying to come up with some set of criterion so that we can be sure to call the balls and the strikes if someone tries to play funny business later on.
I see. The PCDC really has not discussed at length what that criteria would be. Usually if there is some roof with like a significant, I don't want to say significant, but a roof structure, that's how we have seen it so thus far. And I guess because we only had 3 in the past 5 years, it really hasn't come up as a discussion topic. But if there is a actual connected roofing system in there, at that point, so if you were to, I'll just give it an example. If you had, if this house just had a patio in the back and then they wanted to put 2 poles and then a roof over it, we would consider that a part of a house. Although the patio was there and that was an accessory structure, with the roof over it tied to the house, we consider that to be part of the actual building footprint at that point. And actually that changes the classification, even though it was a patio and it's still a patio, but it's covered. The code considers that a part of the house. So,
Okay.
and
So we're
looking,
using I'm sorry, pardon me.
no, go ahead.
We're using a roofing as the thing that provides linkage between multiple structures. For example, if in this configuration, if we were to remove the roof and just have that slatted wall on one side, would we consider that to be sufficient to tie these 2 things together structurally, or are we using a covering, a roof covering, as the thing that denotes a sufficient attachment? I just think we need to come up with something so that we're consistent in the future about what is and isn't a connection.
Yeah, the roofing, it would be the roofing component of it. If they just had no roof and it was just the side enclosure,
Yeah.
that seems kind of like a fence in a way.
Yeah.
So that really wouldn't be, we wouldn't classify it in the same way if it was just, if it didn't have a roof. But as it does have that roof connection to it.
It does kind of lead the question though, and I tend to agree with you because a roof could be subjective as well. What if it was just 1 foot wide?
Right.
What if, I mean, and then I also am curious, one of the challenges we had last time with this was the size, the height being so large. I'm curious, do we still, I understand relative to where the other house is because of the elevation, it's not as big, but are there limitations to garages or, those kind of things? I know it has an apartment above it, but, kind of curious if people still have concerns around that.
It's not really an apartment, just to clarify, as opposed to just a studio, because there's
A
no
great
plumbing,
room. Yeah, that's true. No
in there.
bathroom. Or,
Chairman, if I can add a component in some of what Mr. Roper was kind of addressing and what we took from the previous meeting to address Mr. Brophy's concerns, is that, the original petition submission clearly identified it as a detached or an accessory structure, and that was a concern. in there. But what we noticed is that in their design, they were not looking for any of the reliefs that are provided to a detached structure that would be permitted under code, for the exception of the height. And
Right.
looking at this, all this would have been within the buildable area. So we looked at it in terms of, well, if it was connected to the house, then the height and the overall area or the number of stories, isn't an issue in terms of what's permitted by right. So we had a discussion about, well, that connection, that linkage, and if that was possible. And we looked at it that yes, it had to be a three-dimensional linkage. It could not be a two-dimensional or flat type of linkage between the two. It did need a roof covering of some sort. At some point you get to that gray area, whether that needed to be enclosed. They did provide some, they continued the slatting that exists on the current house along the sides, and there, which also kind of provides some privacy for the neighbor immediately to the west. And again, they started to create more of a three-dimensional connection between the two structures without any request for any relief for the garage. And that's, from a staff perspective, and something Jonathan and I talked about was, that was the key, that we would be able to justify the distinction between somebody else just coming in as the original application did with a multi-story detached structure. And there, at what point does it, is it no longer connected? At what point does it benefit from the setback reliefs that a detached structure gets, and such? And it becomes a judgment call. And here, I think from a staff perspective, we see a clear three-dimensional connection with some mass. So it's not, you could look at it's that it's narrow, but it's not too narrow. And so when we look at it in plan, and hopefully when we look at it in completion, there will be a clear linkage between these two buildings, or connection.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah,
with the hope that that sets the standard for the future until we change the code to address something like this, that
Right.
could be the next step too.
Yeah, and I don't mean to suggest a concern with this at all. I just wanted to make sure we had a discussion about what we were going to consider an attachment, so that we would have a consistent decision going forward. And if people tried to play games, we could say, no, that's beyond the standard. And that's something we're not going to be willing to accept.
No, and it's a good point, and Jonathan and I talked about it. So in this, again, there is a clear connection between the two structures that has a three-dimensional mass, has a roof, has a partial wall. So we see it more than just where they're looking than it is the fence. And most importantly, there is no request for any setback reductions that an accessory structure would normally ask. And that's one of the merits about having this long yard too. It's to their benefit, but in most cases, the accessory structure could be 10 feet behind the property line if they wanted to.
Right.
One other thing I'm just going to add to that, which I think is just makes this a little bit more distinct, is the fact that not only has a roof, structure over there and substantial structure, but it also has a functional space underneath it. Just as opposed to just an overhang or an awning or a fence or things like that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense.
And I do like the fact that they did bring in that fencing material, which helps tie it in with the original house. Okay, any other questions or comments?
We do have the architect and the owner. If they have any comments, I'm bringing them in.
While you're doing that, was Carol able to join us?
Yes,
I'm
she
here.
is on.
Oh, good. That's right. I remember. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't have any questions.
All right.
Great.
And
So
Pam, you okay?
That being said, do I hear a petition? Who would like to make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
All right.
Motion to approve the petition for community design, site plan review, and concept stormwater management plan review for residential action at 9044 Watsonia Court, as presented in the memorandum from the Department of Planning and Community Development dated October 1st, 2020, subject to any staff conditions noted therein.
I will second that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Carlos, before we call the roll call vote, I just want to see, did we have any other public comments on this? Just before we go right to the vote.
All right, I'm taking a look right now, or engaging the audience. 1 second. And as of right now, we don't have any hands raised up. If there's any questions regarding this petition, if you can click the little hand icon that is located at the bottom of the screen.
Let's give it 30 seconds to make sure.
And Chairman, there are none.
Okay, will you please call the roll call vote?
Commissioner Spiegelglass,
Approved.
Commissioner Saunders,
Mr. Saunders was recused.
correct. Commissioner Lewis,
Approve.
Commissioner Brophy,
Approved.
Commissioner Rich,
Approved.
Commissioner Wagner,
Approved.
and Commissioner Jurgel.
Approved.
The motion passes unanimously 6-0.
Great. Thanks everybody for who came on. So appreciate it. Okay, that being said, we'll move on to discussion items. So item A is urban agriculture, formerly quality of life items. I believe, Carlos, you're going to be making this presentation?
Yes, I will. Bear with me 1 second here as we kind of reset on the screen share. Okay, so everybody should have received a copy of the first draft of the written component of the proposed requirements for urban agriculture. Again, we've been kind of focusing this more specifically to traditional agriculture activities that are taking place in an urban environment in which the council would like to see some parameters that are reflective of the community's values as to those that will be done. And there were some specific items that the council requested to be addressed, and those were chickens, bees, bamboo, and some of these natural gardens or oversized natural gardens that have taken up the full extent of a lot or so. And what we propose is to establish those as accessory uses within the zoning code, as opposed to finding them in other parts of the code, and provide the parameters which would be reflective of the community values under what conditions those would be authorized or allowed. Again, the goal here was not to look at this in terms of how pets are regulated or how nuisances and noises are regulated. This was solely regarding specific agricultural uses that are conducted on property specifically, and establishing the standards and limitations in which they would be permitted to do so. To do that, we talked about developing a section of definitions to define these aspects, and you have a list of those definitions there, and the written descriptions for each of those, and those are solely through research on what was available from other communities, through and other organizations that provided some standards regarding horticulture, urban agriculture, livestock, apiaries, and natural landscapings. And this was to provide some direction, and again, to make sure that the ordinance is specific to the goals of the council in terms of what the use function that they're trying to ensure that the parameters are in place when they're done in single family residential properties. That being said, that's what the purpose and intent is, and that you have a written description of that. And again, the goal is to be clear to what the council's goals are regarding this. One is to recognize that the city is supportive of urban agricultural activities on residential properties, as long as they're reflective to our community values and done in a way that are cognizant that our lots are tight. They do, breed pest or other rodents. And they can be a little scary too if they're close to a sidewalk or walking path or street in there. So that there should be some parameters to make sure that that they blend in and are softened, so they're not out of character with the surroundings. Again, those were the community parameters. Make sure that they minimize disruption to adjacent properties. Sure that residents are informed of of what it takes to operate these types of things, or once that there's some type of exit strategy. I think it's a term that was used previously. This ordinance again would be specifically to the rearing of livestock as defined here, and horticulture in terms of gardening on those two specifics. And regarding livestock, that the council had indicated the commission consider addressing chickens and bees, and those are listed in there in page 4 of 17 on your report. And then we'll talk about this later, that of those other items that we haven't addressed, whether we want to or not, if there would be a process for review to permit those things that that go beyond just those chickens and bees. And then the specific items that would be prohibited, and in this case, the direction of council was to prohibit roosters on residential properties. When we get to horticulture, again, that's what would be permitted by right, what would be permitted by site plan review when somebody wants to go above and beyond what are the community standards, and then what would be completely prohibited, such as the planting of bamboo on residential properties. And then it goes out and sets the process for permitting and a process for revocation if we get to that point. So those are the specifics you have, I think, on there. My goal tonight was really to talk about the first component of it regarding the definitions, the purpose and intent, the rearing of livestock and horticulture to some extent, and then kind of say the permitting and revocation, depending how much you want to talk regarding those two sections on there. So that was a quick summary. I know you got copies of that today or late this afternoon, but I'd be glad to answer any questions, and if not, just kind of entertain a discussion on those components.
Does anybody have any initial questions or comments?
This is Mike. I got.
Chairman?
Go ahead, Carol. Sorry.
It's okay. Carlos, I was wondering, what under the definition of urban agriculture, what is the difference between cultivating plants under this definition and just a regular garden, like what I've got already?
There isn't. There isn't any broad, in terms of the umbrella of what is horticulture, which could include, your typical vegetable garden to your flower garden to your perennials, annuals in there. And the intent is here, again, to provide the definition that this is where it would fall under. But when you get to how much is permitted, that's going to be on that second page. That there would be some limitations on the overall area.
So Carlos, one item that jumps into my mind, and I think maybe this just is my misreading or perhaps some further polishing that's necessary, but it looks to me like there's a permit that's required for anyone to grow vegetables in their yard. A $25 annual fee.
I think that's
And I
just
think-
if it's a site plan review.
I'm sorry, say again?
I think that's only if it's required to have a site plan review, then you get a permit to do, and that relays, goes into doves, pigeons, birds of prey, livestock, things like that.
Well, it says prior to rearing livestock or initiating approved site plan review for horticulture purposes.
Hmm.
Horticulture, if we look at the section above it, is vegetable gardens.
Okay. Like I said, and some of it is in the wording. So those horticultural activities that would necessitate the site plan review would be those that would exceed the authorized standards.
So, right. I think we may
That's
want
the
to.
intent, and it may not read correctly. So we'll look
I think
into
we
that.
may want something in here that describes when a site plan review is necessitated. That might fix that up.
Okay.
The other aspect that I thought I'd raise is grandfathering. How do we address that? I mean, I know, for example, bamboo. I've got bamboo. There's a bunch of bamboo around. If we enact this, is everyone going to have to tear out their bamboo within 5 days, or how's that going to work?
No, and that's one of the things that I was hoping for some discussion in there. I don't have the answers, but if it's, I know in some of the public comments, there have been some inquiries about a process for grandfathering. And we can come up with some language that would refer to that. I think still that they, if something is going to be grandfathered, whether it's regardless of whether it's a livestock or it is some type of vegetation, that they would still be subject to some specific standards or in place. And when we get to bamboo, again, that it's maintained at that those barriers are fully in place, and that there's still an opportunity to continue to monitor.
Right.
But how are we going to know? How are we going to know when somebody's bamboo was installed, especially a year or two from now?
For the most part, we know, I mean, through aerial mapping services, whether it's through county or Google or such, we know where a majority of the locations are at least the sizable patches of worth in there. Beyond that, no, we don't know if somebody, did it prior, if this ordinance does get adopted, we would not know without their verbal consent of whether it was done before or after.
I would think there should be an amnesty period.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, monkeys, I need to. Apologies.
The other thing I'd say, Rob, regarding your comment is, I suspect if the bamboo is a problem, someone's going to know about it. If it's on an interior, if the house has some kind of, is a donut shape and someone plants bamboo in the middle of the donut, the only people that care are the homeowners. But if you're putting bamboo in your front yard or in your side yard, I suspect a neighbor is going to know pretty quickly and raise a flag. So maybe that's kind of a self-policing or a group policing effort.
Right. I do wonder, well, let's say somebody has bamboo in their yard, they sell their house, somebody new comes in, they don't know how to maintain it, they let it go awry. That I don't know exactly how we would handle that, but it would come in as a complaint at that point in time,
Yeah. And maybe to Carlos's point, we use aerial mapping, which is surprisingly good nowadays, to look at where it was and where it is and say, you got to tear it out or get it back to where it was before.
Sorry, go ahead.
Then, I mean, if we can use that, then would we basically notify the residents that we know you have bamboo in your yard, you need to maintain it in accordance and, follow these certain rules and apply for permits on an ongoing basis?
Yeah. I guess what I would say, there's this Latin phrase, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse, right?
Right.
So it's not our job, other than through these public sessions, to notify people. And once this comes into effect, it's their job to monitor, police, and adhere.
What about something like honeysuckle, which I think is also, invasive and can be an issue? So
Now, And the council did have extensive discussion regarding that. And the city even has some policies for its parks and all that. The difference between honeysuckle and bamboo is, at least the instances of bamboo and olivet, it's purposely planted. Honeysuckle as an invasive species, it's not something that somebody generally plants deliberately in there. And we look at that, that's between at least bamboo and honeysuckle, that's the biggest distinction.
Agreed. Like I have tons of honeysuckle I didn't plant and it came with the house, so I wouldn't want to be fined for it, but you're right. Maybe it's worth just calling out that you can't be new, but it's 100% grandfathered, but just, yeah, I don't know if we're just going to set the rules. I'm just wondering if we call it out, but
No,
yeah,
you-
I see what you're saying.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mike. Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Under natural landscaping, we talk about native plants. And how do we define native plants in 2020? Who's the arbitrator of what's a native plant and what's not?
It's a good question about what is the process after the ordinance. The city does have the expertise of an arborist, or excuse me, a horticulturalist, to provide us some advice and direction. We, at the current time, the way the current codes are written, we haven't utilized the services to the full extent that we hope we would when we get there. The other thing, both the Missouri Botanical Gardens and the University of Missouri have extensive information that helps, you know, in calling out the specific species and things. Where the current gap is, again, is finding that person that has that expertise of the vernacular or the visuals of what is and what isn't, and that's where we would rely on the city's horticulturalists.
Would the city put together a brochure that would give some guidance, you know, and put on the website or something like that to sort of talk through what would be acceptable? You know, through my walks in the neighborhood, you see people calling native landscaping or native gardens where they just decided to stop cutting their grass, for instance. Is that really a legitimate, native garden, urban garden? Or is that just,
No, and the goal, again, one of the purposes of this ordinance, as it's codified, is to provide staff the direction on how those are judged and evaluated in their process. Again, if somebody, there are certain grasses that are not native. They fall under a different classification. When we look at native plants, and there we're looking to provide, we're looking for a process where somebody can do this by right with minimal disruption from the city or from my staff in there, whether it's a vegetable garden or natural gardens. Is one of the things, and Jonathan will talk about it later, is promoting, rain gardens and those things. And they're reasonable up to a certain size. Once they exceed that size, and we're looking at it as a numeric standard, because and then from there, a code enforcement officer or building inspector or Jonathan or myself, can make specific calls of when they go over. Once they exceed that size, then we're looking for the expertise of the commission to come into play. That we're going to ask that they apply for a site plan review, and that gives both our residents the opportunity that do want to take on the extent and time to do these natural landscaping projects that take whether it's a front yard or a whole yard in there. But that there is a process for the review where it's the collaboration of the commission to figure out when it gets too far. And we also believe that there should be some standards in terms of making sure that there are defined boundaries for these, that there are setback distances for these. And we look at that because, you know, these things do have a tendency to attract different types of wildlife, some that are nice and great, and some that you prefer that weren't part of the attraction. And therefore, you know, to shove this all the way to the street or all the way to a property line is unfair to the public who may be using the pathway or to a neighbor in there. And again, that's when they exceed a defined parameter, and there we would look to the commission to help us in that assessment. So I'm hoping that
And I do notice that,
yes,
I'm sorry, Eric, go ahead. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I do notice that you talk about gardens and to be limited to 10% of the total lot area. And I guess anything over that they would come in and get a permit. How would you handle, you know, we're all kind of responsible for that right-of-way area. And you kind of, I mean, maybe you just answer the question because you talked about property lines. I would assume this would not extend into the rights of way.
It should not. That would be the goal or the intent of this ordinance. And again, the worst thing to do is be, you know, walking along a sidewalk or a curb and have something jump out at, you know, without an opportunity or time for reaction.
Do you think it's worthwhile to just, even in that definition of natural landscaping, to just specify this does not include uncut lawns, unkept gardens? Or unmaintained gardens?
It does lead to interesting question, like, because where does it step the line with bushes or things that are already in a house or trees or things like that? So do we need to clarify that?
It's a tough thing to clarify, you know, but when you see it, you know it.
Yeah.
But I think somehow, you know, if we don't specifically call it out or address this issue, somebody's going to point to it and say their uncut lawn is a natural landscape. So that way, I just figure if we somehow have in this where it addresses that particular issue, or with the intent, I should say.
Is the issue mostly with grasses?
The primary, I think to me, the primary issue is not necessarily the grasses themselves. It's the extent and size that some of these have taken.
No, I agree. I guess my question was not articulated well enough, but the instances in which there is something other than just what we would call traditional landscaping, where we're trying to split these hairs between what's curated and therefore acceptable and just unkempt and therefore unacceptable. Is the hair we're splitting really about grasses? Because, you know, if you have trees and bushes and things like that that are just part of a regular landscape, so what? When I conjure in my mind either a natural landscape that's a curated, you know, wild thing, but it's what we're kind of accepting, versus what's just someone letting their yard go wild, what springs into my mind is grasses and wildflowers, not anything else. So I'm wondering if we could focus the attention of this on that issue and say, if you're going to have grasses of a certain height or more, you know, these rules apply. I don't know. This is a question more than a statement.
I understand the point, and I'm trying to.
Like, I don't think we want to get into what kinds of trees you can grow, because I don't think anyone has concerns about what kinds of trees we're growing. It seems like it's wildflowers and grasses that we're concerned about.
part of the thought was, of course, that, you know, there is that natural landscaping, which kind of reflects, you know, the illustration you gave here. And then there is the manicured garden, you know, or somebody's front yard shrubs and or plantings, annuals, perennials. The goal, at least, is not to consider those as natural landscaping, but more the image you just gave in there, without getting into the details of what is and what isn't in there. So the definition here used at natural landscaping, also called native gardening, with the use of native plants and grasses, which are indigenous to the geographic area in there. And it may need to be a little, you know, followed up with maybe with some height parameters or descriptive parameters that kind of identify, you know, it's that prairie, somebody wanting to revert to a prairie.
Right.
Or again, even a rain garden, you know, kind of falls in this aspect too. And that's one we would like to promote and not restrict as much. And it's making those distinctions between those that, again, those that are well thought out and those that are just, that have probably exceeded, you know, the parameter of what's acceptable. So we'll look into that. I don't have an answer to that, and it may be, you know, those terms you kind of noted.
This is Mike. I think Richard hit upon an interesting point, though, is even urban gardens need to be maintained. There's a lot of work. You know, they look beautiful, but whether it's a bioswale, there's a lot of work to those. And I think there needs to be some notion about that they're, I don't know what the right word is, they're tended to, they're cultivated. I forget what word you just used, Richard, but it was, you know, they're more than just, hey, I'm just letting my yard go. And, you know, it's now a native landscaping. You know, I do think we should expect some sort of maintenance of it, you know, no matter what direction they go. Even, you know, I was walking through Forest Park the other day, and, you know, they got those beautiful native fields, and there were people all over them, maintaining them, you know, pulling out invasive grasses and stuff like that. You know, so even the sort of the native fields do require some work. But again, I don't know how you legislate that or regulate that.
Well, the only thing is if someone took their whole backyard and made it, you know, a native garden or natural garden, they're only authorized by right 10%. So if they decided to do the entire backyard, it would be greater than 10%. So then it would be subject to site plan review, permits, and annual reviews.
And maybe that's the way we get around it, is by just the percent of the yard. That's a good point.
And maybe we make it a smaller percentage. You know, you get 5% as of right, limiting the damage if someone wants to go crazy. But then if you're going to do more than 5%, you've got to come have it approved, have our horticulturist sign off on it or something. You know, then we, no pun intended, weed out the bad actors and the people that really care submitting what they want.
I like the pun.
And that's one of the difficulties in this. And even as we go more into the details, looking at those percentages and those numbers, with a percentage-based description, therefore, the larger lots, you know, who have more of that land area can have the larger garden, you know. So it's based on the proportion, to make sure that the proportions are the same, because it's hard to treat something on infield or on harvest lane equal to something that's on Mansfield or Forsythia to something that's on High Acres or Covington. And each of those, based on the characteristics of their neighborhood, are different, and they can accommodate the larger aspects.
But what if we use a square footage instead of a percentage to curb that issue.
But it goes down to exactly how, and that's part of what this discussion is for, is just to, how extensive do we want to establish parameters
Yeah.
in place? And we're fine if it's a numeric. My goal is for my staff, it's easier if it's a defined numerical number, whether it's a percentage or a square footage, because then it's a plain yes or no type of aspect of it. There's minimal need for the inspector or the enforcement officer to make a personal judgment call. And
Maybe
that's
it's
what we
both.
want to get away from.
Maybe it's, 5% up to a maximum of X square feet.
Mm-hmm. So we can take a look at those.
What about the vegetable gardens at 1%? That seems pretty low. There's some residents that have some substantial gardens.
I would agree, especially when talking 10%. And I guess my question about natural gardens, does a garden include, again, just bushes in the front yard? Is a tree considered? It's just understanding that.
I think my not to jump in, but my reaction to all of this is, I think the definitions section could be cut down and maybe clarified a bit more because I don't think we need quite as many definitions, but perhaps we need the ones that are there to be a little bit more crystallized. That's not a dig at all, Carlos. I know this is
No, and I don't. No, you're fine. I don't take it personally.
but I think we could address some of those issues by polishing the definitions a bit, and I'm happy to help with that if that's something that would be useful.
One thing I had a question on, and I'm looking through other, there were a bunch of, I guess, other regulations by other communities that restricted certain weeds, thistles, or things like that. And our plan doesn't address any of that. Is that something we want to throw in there? I forgot what the term of those plants were.
Under the existing code, we do have regulations or restrictions for noxious weeds.
Yes, that's what it was.
Okay. So those are already in place.
Good.
And there, again, my concern is more when it gets to that non-building or zoning vernacular of arborvitaes, and I'm talking about shrubbery in that case, but I'm kind of using it as an example, to entrust that on a code enforcement officer or building inspector to go out there and make that call. Now, again, we do have the services of a horticulturalist, but we don't want to pull him or her completely away from their day-to-day tasks if we can, provide enough parameters to make it simple enough for the current staff to enforce.
No, that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure if those are noxious weeds or things, or noxious plants are addressed in other areas, that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing that.
And it could be, it'd probably be good to bring those to the commission also, so you have that list, or at least you're familiar with what the code says on those other aspects. Because I know that's been part of the discussion is what some of the other parameters are in different sections.
What's I think the question is going to be the grandfathering, how we need to structure that.
I think one of the recommendations would be that, again, going through or providing some type of educational process or informative process as we adopt this, if this ordinance does get adopted, through the newsletter, through our websites, and to get people to it'd be best, that it would be ideal where they would be brought to us as opposed for us looking for them. That within a certain time period, if you have a rooster, or you have excess, or you have bamboo, that you notify the city of its holdings, and then at that point, that we, they're either registered or recorded, and we determine, whether it would have been permitted or not permitted through the standards that are put in place. And if not, a process to get there if need be,
Right.
or exemption, as long as it doesn't get similar to the current non-conforming clauses, as long as it doesn't grow or exceed more than what it is at the time it was. So that kind of puts the onus on the property owner to kind of bring that to us earlier on. And I don't think we will catch them all, but I think that would be ideal if it was a process that was set up that way.
The other question, I think that there was a comment from Nancy Solomon in the question and answer section that talked about replacement of lives. If someone has a rooster and they're grandfathered in, what if it dies? Do they get to have another one? How do we know if they've replaced it? I guess that's I don't think it makes much sense for us to spend a lot of time talking about people trying to be sneaky and get around it. But are we going to allow, if someone has a rooster now, for them to always have a rooster, or do they get to keep it until it dies?
It would be a decision we'll have to discuss. It's a good point. I don't have an answer to that. I don't think that the intent here is that they would be permitted to replace one for one because they had one. It would be, at the most extreme, at the point that the rooster becomes deceased, or that they're given a reasonable time to find other housing, or it's just not permitted. I don't know where, we haven't had an,
Yeah.
I don't have a direction or a recommendation to the commission of what it should be.
I guess I'm more thinking of the grandfathering for the existing issues of bamboo that are being properly maintained.
Right.
That's more what I would consider grandfathering. But if we have essentially a bamboo issue that's out of control, or a rooster that's causing some nuisance problems, I don't know if we want to consider that grandfathered in.
I agree.
Yeah.
And there may be other mechanisms to deal with that, right? I mean, if the bamboo is encroaching, that's one thing. If the rooster is making noise at 2 a.m., there are noise ordinances and things that can address that also. So maybe it doesn't all have to be dealt with through this one issue, one resolution.
I think there is a problem with the noise ordinance with the roosters, because it's something
Right.
about a continuous noise for up to a certain period of time, where these are more intermittent,
And
yes,
aggressive.
not necessarily sustained, So
BB gun.
stop.
Okay.
So, Carol,
Am I unmuted now?
you're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that did. So I had a couple points. I've been listening, but one of the comments I was thinking of was the definition of native gardening. I think that one of the things that we need to do is cite a source, such as the Missouri, as determined by the Missouri Botanical Gardens or State of Missouri Conservation Service, or something like that. Otherwise, that's always going to be a question.
I like that. And maybe say, that it, including any revisions to that definition from that source.
Right, or as amended, however, whatever the proper terminology is, because they will constantly be updating their list. But we need to have some source be the arbitrator of what is or is not.
Right. Any other discussions or thoughts right now on this? I know we have some questions or, that were being presented on the chat session. But before we go to those, I just didn't know if we wanted to have any more further discussion.
The last thing I would say is I think as we approach these, it'd be best just to do it one by one. It's just easier to kind of focus it, each one, let's focus on one maybe each meeting and tackle it.
Really good idea.
Focus on each one of what?
I mean, like urban agriculture, that's one, and then pet, that's another, because I feel like otherwise we're going to jump around.
Well, I think the goal is, honestly, guys, is to try to get this approved, make changes, get this revised, and make make a decision on this at the next meeting.
Wow. Okay.
And I know it's kind of fast, so that's kind of the whole point right now is if you're uncertain about a few things, let's bring it up. Let's just kind of talk about it. If we're not uncertain about it and we feel pretty good with it, then let's move on.
Well, I guess, for example, like apiary, like, we said 3, but what size of each, and so it's things like that I'm wondering if we need to break each one individually. Maybe not, but
No,
I'm just curious what others think.
I think a size of that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure they come in different sizes. So, Carlos or Jonathan, did you guys see any standard size of that we could also include as a reference point?
Yes, there was some information in some of the sites on there. And again, that the structure itself would probably fall under the accessory structure in there, but we can put something more specific.
Well, just
Some
to
of
make sure
these to some extent, what was envisioned would be that the application process for these would have more of the specific or the more of the detailed standards, like you saw in some of the samples that I provided in the past meetings, where instead of overloading the code with all these all the details or the specifics, the applications in itself would identify some some of the additional conditions and things that would be put in place. And let's say even for the apiaries that they'd be subject to a specific setback and such. And that gets into in the permitting process where if you look at the section E, item 3, the commission shall prepare an application with general standards and conditions. And it goes on and on. It's similar to what we did with chapter 425, which are our community design standards. That kind of reference that the commission will put together residential redevelopment and design standards, and we have a whole separate manual for that.
Carlos, are we assuming that chicken coops and bee apiaries are a special kind of accessory use?
The rearing of chickens or bees is a use, an accessory use, yes.
Okay, so on the one hand, we have the rearing of them, but on the other hand, we have the structure they live in.
Correct.
And the structures they live in would be a chicken coop or a bee apiary, beehive. So I'm just trying to figure out why those structures are not now covered under our code as an accessory use, or are they?
The chicken coop is, the apiaries, we never established any standards for those.
Okay. So this goes to Brian's question, I think, a little bit. I'm trying to make the distinction in my own mind as to if these are separate, and if so, how and why. I mean, on the one hand, you have the raising of them, but if we're talking about the house that they live in, it is an accessory structure of some type.
Mm-hmm. Now, and it's a good point, and you know, the intent here again is that either the structure standards are identified under the accessory structures, like the chicken coop in there, or if we need to go back and extract them, which again, there are some differences. I prefer that they you know, that a structure stay a structure and a use stay a use. What some of the other communities have done is that they'd identified, you know, what I'll call the rules and regulations in the application in lieu of putting it in the code.
But then are we going to review that application, or would that be something that staff would handle?
That's something that, yeah, staff would draft up for the commission for its consent, and then council to authorize that that application would be used that way. So if there are ever any changes, it's not going back to do a code change. It's more doing an application change, similar to what we do with our residential design guidelines right now. As we've expanded them and or tweaked them, we don't go back to amend the ordinances. We go back and amend the guidelines, the document that's reviewed by the commission, and then we forward a copy to the council for their consent.
That makes sense. I actually like that.
This is Mike. If I could ask a question about permitting. Given that a lot of what we're talking about is going to impact the neighbors more, should there be any discussion about requesting sign off by the immediate neighbors of the permittee's intent?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. It's something for the commission. The goal, at least from the staff level, is these are the standards that are reflective of the community's values and that the city would allow or authorize on residential property under these conditions. Those that are in excess would require, of course, the commission review. Many of the other communities then had a process for notification. The direction I got from the council was that they were not looking for neighboring properties to approve the use, but that ensure they had proper notification and an opportunity to be heard through a public meeting if it exceeded those standards.
Yeah, and I should have been clear. I was talking about if it ever came before the commission, not necessarily permitting by right.
No, no, and we would follow the same procedures of the notification within 300 feet.
300 feet seems like a lot, but actually, make sure it's all covered.
It's always a hard in there. Oh, we'll provide some type of recommendation. I'll talk with Jonathan on that. I know one of the comments we had was to not to limit it to just abutting properties. To look at it kind of larger.
I think Carol's trying to talk. Carol?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So let's say I want to put in a couple of beehives, but my neighbor is allergic to bees. So how, I mean, do we say that's okay? The neighbor just can't go outside ever? Or do beehives, are we fairly well protected from bees that, you know, fly about? I mean, I'm just not sure. How do we handle that?
It's a good question.
It's a good question, and I don't have an answer for that, except that under the current regulations, there isn't the standard. This would establish a standard and a process for notification. Now, remember, if your neighbor wanted to, or if you wanted to rear bees on your property, as long as you conform with the standards that are developed, it would not be up to your neighbor to tell you can't. The goal here would be that at least the neighbor would be informed of that, at least the way it's currently written, or the thought process in which it's currently written. If we want to go a step further, I mean, that's why we're having this discussion. I'm not necessarily sure if you know. Yeah.
If I could share a thought on that, the notion of allergic neighbors. At the end of the day, what we're talking about here is a hobby, which is a valid one, and I think one that we should value and respect and allow to happen. However, I don't think, if someone has an actual significant life-threatening allergy to bees, I feel like that needs to be taken into consideration when deciding whether someone's going to engage in this hobby, because unlike other hobbies, beekeeping affects neighbors significantly. I mean, you have more bees around, and if we're increasing the risk of someone being exposed to a potentially life-threatening bee sting solely because someone else wants to engage in the hobby of beekeeping, that seems like the equities have fallen in the wrong direction. And I'm wondering whether a precondition of registering your beehive is that there needs to be a notice, and if someone can demonstrate a medical allergy to them within X range, they have the absolute right to say no.
I tend to agree, especially when somebody's, at least some of the regulations I saw about a beehive being 10 feet away from a property line. If someone has, my daughter has a bee allergy. It's not life-threatening, but they say the more times they get stung, the more of it, the risk becomes,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very good point.
I mean, people are allowed the enjoyment of their property, and if you're putting a beehive right on the property line and they can't go outside, you're taking away their right to quiet enjoyment of their property, which is a pretty significant issue.
And it's not like bees can be controlled.
They can't. That's the problem with bees. Yeah, it's one thing if you're whittling. It's a different thing if you're spewing bees all over the place. It seems like we shouldn't endanger. I think as a commission, our job is to keep people safe, among other things. And I think we need to have some rules that allow for the safety of the neighbors if there's a true medical condition at issue.
I tend to agree. The other thing I was thinking is that maybe we just need to also be sure that the setbacks for a beehive perhaps are greater than other things, to keep them further away from the property line and to the interior of the property.
Right. So that would mean taking it away from an authorized use and putting it down as a permitted use.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I don't think that there's enough people who are probably raising bees that's a large inconvenience. There's enough impact to the neighbors with bees versus a garden. If you put a small little garden in your backyard, that doesn't impact anyone usually, especially if we have a 1% or 2%. But I'd be okay with bees. And I think it kind of comes to my earlier point is we're saying 3, but if we're saying that the size is relative to the miscellaneous use, Carlos, what is that size? I assume it's much larger. And so not that it's likely, but if the size is, let's say 10 feet by 10 feet, well, that's ridiculous for a beehive, but what's to stop them? So that's why I thought maybe going through each one, just to make sure we've touched on everything. But I'm hearing what you say, Carlos, you don't want to get so prescriptive on this. And I get that, but I think the earlier suggestion about maybe updating the definitions might help just to give clarity, because then that allows us more to work with anytime we have to assess any of these.
Let me understand also based on the comments Trevin said. So you're looking at currently, if somebody wanted to rear chickens or rear bees, they do need to apply for a permit. And that is the process for the review would be administrative. If I heard you correct, you kind of
Oh,
know.
okay. I see it now.
Are you looking at that it would go to a site plan review?
I think that
Oh,
from,
yeah.
from my perspective, we just care about the notice and comment being triggered. Which, Carlos, would that be triggered
Yeah.
as it's written now, just even as it's just going to you for sign off?
Yeah, yes, the process can be done the same, whether it's administrative or if it's a notification that the commission is going to consider a site plan review or petition for site plan review.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't suggesting a site plan. I think
Okay.
it can be within yours. I just was questioning what are you going to use in terms of somebody says their beehive is 3x3 or 10x10 or 4x4? Where's your boundary?
No,
Or
and
do
I
we need
understand
to-
that. Yeah, for the size of the apiaries, and there are standards that we can apply or put in place. I'm not sure whether, again, because the apiary itself would be the structure, the rearing of the bees would be the use, and they're, unlike a coop, it's pretty much a single use type of compartment that they put together. So we'll look at that and put some parameters in terms of what that size is, and I'm not sure where I'll have it yet though. Or noted.
Do you think we need either somewhere on either this this text or the permit indicate about the issues with neighbors with a life-threatening disease, or not life-threatening disease, but a life-threatening reaction? The bees would be restricted, something to that extent. So it's at least written down somewhere.
It would be, whether it should be in the code, I'm not sure yet. Let me
Maybe at least on the
kick that one
permit.
around. It needs to be noted. I envisioned it as part of the application, as opposed to a code reference in there. And again, there could be, there's still the possibility, the way the outline work, that there's the authorized, the site plan, and the prohibited. And it could be another reference in the prohibited that rearing the bees, and using the language that was noted about if somebody could demonstrate that there was a medical concern, then it would just be prohibited.
Right. So do we need to further discuss those items that are listed under the site plan review, include like doves and pigeons? I don't know if that needs necessarily site.
Yeah, there were some items in there that came about from the last discussion of whether, again, we're looking to identify those that we would permit. The way I look at it, that those that are not there, if they don't fall under another classification in the ordinance, then they're not part of this process. The code already prohibits dovecotes. The code prohibits exotic animals. There are regulations regarding cats and dogs already in place. There's, even to the extent of what is a dangerous dog in there. So I'm looking at it in terms of somebody called and asked, I want to have a cow. If it's not listed as an accessory use, my answer is no, it's not noted. And again, this ordinance is organic. It may change over time, or we may add, or we may remove some things based on how effective it is.
So Carlos, can I be of assistance, or can someone be of assistance in tweaking those definitions, or is that something that you'd like to take on?
No, absolutely. I would encourage any assistance on that. So I'll forward that to you take a look at. And then also, I mean, once the commission, again, we're trying to get the framework in place, get consensus on the process, and the more we can have this codified, the better. But then again, it will be reviewed by Mr. Martin before it's entertained for any action.
It will or will not?
It will.
Okay, good. Okay,
So I've got a quick question.
go ahead, Carol.
So when we've got chickens and bees listed, and we're talking about, let's say, a chicken having a chicken coop. Okay, are we going to specify that you can have one chicken coop per property, or two, or you can only have so much coverage by chicken coops? I mean, just for a similar kind of question for beehives. Are we talking about 3 beehives, or 4, or 20?
We'll take a look at it to make sure that it's clear.
Okay.
Carol, good point.
I mean, I might have 2 coops with 3 chickens in each. Is that okay?
The intent is no, because under the accessory structures, you're only authorized 1 coop.
Okay.
Under the uses, you're allowed to up to 6 chickens. Again, and maybe we'll bring in the template application. The application would kind of tie all these things together into hopefully a 1-page sheet that the resident would be issued or receive.
So if somebody had 7, could they still file a permit, assuming like they had bigger space or, proper procedures? Would that somehow through the permitting process or site plan review eventually be allowed if it was appropriate?
Under the way it's currently written, the answer is no. Not, that administratively, we would anybody in my staff would not allow or be authorized to have someone exceed 6.
But could it come
No.
before, if there was an issue, could it come before a commission?
We can set that as a process if it wants to be considered, yes. But right now, the way it's written, no, that wasn't in there.
How does everybody else feel about that? This would give a little bit of some flexibility, with it. Not necessarily related to prohibited, issues, but more of the, the author, of the authorized uses.
I can only speak for myself. This is Mike. I can only speak for myself. I just soon limit it at 6 and leave it at that. I can't imagine it would come in front of us much, if at all. But I just wouldn't want to leave the door open for anything. I just personally, I think we just set a limit and live with it.
I agree.
Okay.
Agreed.
Carlos, one other item is
So
what
I have a
happens.
question.
Sorry, Carol, go ahead.
So I have 6 chickens, and 6, 3 of them hatch eggs, and so now I have a whole bunch of chickens. I got chickens and chicks. Am I allowed to keep the chicks?
Is that possible without a rooster?
Yeah, that's not how it works.
Immaculate conception taking place on the chicken farm.
Again, and I think
Yeah, well, let's do that. That was
it's a good
taken
question, Carol. It's a question that we face every year with the licensing for dogs and cats.
Right.
That's why there's that annual process of the application. The goal is, if on month 6 or month 8, you, for however feasible, you have some chicks that come about. I mean, by the time you get to the end of that calendar year and reapply, the expectation is that you can only have 6.
So we're talking about an annual application.
That is correct.
Okay.
One other issue is what happens with these structures when the hobby dies down. You know, you've got a coop, you have chickens, you get sick of the chickens or they all die or whatever, and then the coop sits there and rots. Do we want to put something in here about those structures falling into disrepair or removal of equipment after the use is concluded?
Yeah, some of the thought was that they would be incorporated in the application, that you would consent to a final inspection of some sort. If you're not going to renew, that we would have the right to do a final inspection, and that all the, anything that was associated with the activity be removed
That makes sense.
from the premise.
That makes sense.
All right, Carlos, is there anything else in the chat sessions that we haven't already addressed? I know we've addressed some of the items.
Yeah, I think we kind of caught a majority of them. There were more specifically to the livestock and roosters, about replacements, how long they can live, the grandfathering, and then the notifications, adjacent versus nearby.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm going back, and I apologize. Maybe I'm just getting senile, but when we talk about grandfathering, we're talking about just grandfathering in the roosters. We're not talking about like the urban gardens that might be an entire lot right now or anything like that, right? We're just talking about grandfathering in any living animals. Is that what we're limiting it to?
We have the bamboo issue.
Oh, and the bamboo issue. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about grandfathering in roosters, just the bamboo.
Okay. Just the bamboo. All right. Yeah,
And
I know we talked a lot about bamboo. I just don't know if we were limiting it to that. Okay. My apologies.
And well-maintained gardens. I think we need to specify that because we don't want to grandfather in something that's already a nuisance.
Yeah, the notion being that whatever's grandfathered in is in good repair and current use.
Yes, exactly.
All right. I appreciate all the comments. It's a unique ordinance to try to put together. So,
I think you did a pretty good job.
Yeah, kudos.
there's a lot of information.
Yeah, very, very nice job.
Yeah. Okay, that being said, I think if we don't have any more questions, comments, we'll move on to item B of discussion item, stormwater management. Discussion regarding stormwater management practices being continued. Jonathan, do you have anything to present tonight?
Yes, sir. And I'll just kind of, I'll start with we had the 7 topic areas: the construction, loss of vegetation, impervious space, infrastructure, soils, topology, and weather. A lot of these things for right now, it's just kind of get sort of mixed in together, and we're not really going through just one at a time at this point. It's just, so just kind of follow along, but we're not actually just talking about just one category, but a lot of this comes together in a way. In each commission meeting, we're just gonna move a little further, advance the ball a little bit further on these things. But last week we did, or last 2 weeks, or 2 meetings, we talked about, we saw the increase in precipitation, either with the frequency of some of the storms or just the storm itself just has more rain. We went through the where Olivet sits in the county, being the top elevated place in the county. So we drain onto other places, which, we kind of noted that we don't have the worst. We have problems with stormwater, but we don't have, it could be worse because we are the highest place. But it also gives us advantages as far as the cost on the infrastructure that we would have to solve these issues. but also we have to be good stewards to our surrounding municipalities, because the more that we drain into other municipalities, the more that they have to deal with it as well. So we have to be good stewards. And finally, with the recap, we looked at in using the contours, we have 5 main watersheds in all of that. And you can see they're split within different colors. So at the top here, most everything north of Olive Boulevard flows into the River de Pere, that concrete channel. Well, it's concrete some areas, other places it's a natural open area. We have the area where like the CVS, Chevy's, part of Hilltop and Collingwood, and also like Kenneth Place and Doris all drains where it drains in a concrete channel that it goes, well, sometimes a concrete channel that goes behind the shops at Price Crossing. We have this other watershed that basically south of Olive, north of Old Bonham, that drains towards U City as well. And we have this little one here that drains kind of towards University City / Clayton, and then finally mostly south of Old Bottom that drains to Ladue. And tonight we're going to actually get into a sub-watershed and looking at what kind of consists of a sub-watershed. So in looking at, we're going to highlight just one particular watershed. So this pink one here, which is the one that all drains to Ladue, and it's highlighted here in green. Also, just to note, these little gray and areas are the impervious surface areas, or the driveways. The darker ones are the buildings. The lighter gray are the parking lots. And these little areas here are either, oh, sorry, I forgot to share my highlighter. These areas here are the floodplain areas as well. So in this area, again, most water drains to Ladue. And then we start looking into sub-watersheds. The important thing about a sub-watershed is to know, we try to get to, if water falls, so I'll go back to this, if water falls in all of that, over here in the pink area, it may not really impact what's going on in the blue area here. Also, if something falls over, let's say in Stacy Park over here, it might not impact what happens over here in Highgate or the Orchards. But when you get down to the sub-watershed, that's where one droplet of water somewhere will actually impact another property within that sub-watershed. So, and looking at trying to define these sub-watersheds, this is, you can see this is Stacy Park again, the highest point in the county. We have Warson Road here. Here's Old Bonham right here, and these are all the contours. So the blue on this one's the higher elevated, the lower elevated portions are the lighter colors, like the yellow here. If you notice these yellow, kind of like these points that keep coming out, those are the very low points that we see, which kind of start forming our sub-watershed. Then we get it. So I'm going to just highlight a few of these. So we have the one at Nantucket, Heather Hill, the western side of Stony Side, and then Arbor Road, which is the one that we're going to look at this evening. And then we even have over at Crosswinds and Bonaire and Highgate. But just to my earlier point, if you were to drop, a droplet of water over here on St. Alfred, that would be contained within the Nantucket watershed, versus if you had it would not transpire over to the Arbor watershed. And looking at this would be relatively if a property if you lived on Arbor Road, this is the watershed. This is how large your watershed. So if any droplet of water that came down here, it could possibly impact houses down here. And just to note, the watershed, so, whoops, you can see a little bit larger a picture here. So here's Old Bottom here. Interesting enough, so why I mentioned this is stormwater is really, we're trying to solve a multitude of stormwater issues, or just to tackle, I guess. Maybe there is no answer for some of these, but to just understand it more before the next coming weeks we're going to more solutions. So in this particular case, it's important to look at a sub-watershed and kind of what's the activity and what's going on. So for PCDC, we're not going to go through every single sub-watershed or watershed that we have, but sometimes we're just going to try to highlight what are the common issues that we see. So then we can solve that common issue, and then we can expand that citywide. So in this case, with the sub-watershed, you have Old Bottom here, you have Bowood over here on the eastern side. On the western side, you have Ramsgate, Beachmont here, and here's Ridgegate. Is it Ridgegate? Yeah. This also and here's Arbor Road here. You also have part of Covington, North and South Covington Meadows Road right here. If you go to your right side of the screen where the aerial's at, you see that there is St. Louis County identified some type of stream that is coming traversing a lot of these different yards on Arbor, and then you go down to Ladue, where you actually have a FEMA designated floodway along with a 100-year floodplain area. So in looking at what, we know that if there's a floodplain, there's a chance that there's a lot of water that we're dealing with, for one. Two, properties that are closer to floodplains might have what's called a higher water table, meaning you have a sump pump that takes water away from your foundation. There's going to be a lot more water, more than likely, around your foundation if you're closer to a floodplain, because there's a lot more water in the ground. Also, in looking at this sub-watershed, and also Deer Creek did identify this stream right here actually as being, they call the Black River. So it's more than just lines on a paper, but Deer Creek has recognized it as an actual creek. And looking at the part of the infrastructure that we have, which are these red lines, the different connecting lines, you see that some of these lines are not connected together. They're actually disjointed. So right here, interesting enough, the water that drains off different yards on Ridgegate, there's an inlet within the again, inlet curb. So you have a picture of that. There's an inlet curb on Ridgegate, so a lot of the water that you think that it runs off your lawn, it runs off your driveway, it goes to the street, and actually it enters this inlet here, and you say goodbye to your water. It's not my problem anymore. Actually, it opens up onto other people's properties on Arbor, which, interesting enough, you could see where on this left side here. So here's the Ridgegate inlet, and here's between 10 Arbor and where 8 Arbor are, where that pipe just lets out into someone's front yard. You could actually see where St. Louis County has that origination of the stream being between 8 and 10 as well. So these things actually do contribute to significant stormwater issues. So if this were maybe connected, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying if it was connected, would that stream still be recognized there? Also, just a note at Covington Meadows right here. So Arbor Road has actually 3 different, well, actually 4. Ridgegate right here. It picks up water from Old Bonham according to this, and it drains it also down between property lines from Old Bonham. Water from Bowood Court for a number of the properties. It picks up water and then it drains it also into Arbor and someone's yard. And then finally Covington Meadows South does the same thing. And interesting that where Covington Meadows lets out, that's also the start of this floodplain area here. So there might be correlation, I don't know, I didn't make their maps, but between South Covington Meadows and all these other streets letting out water and having a stream right there. You know, if it was all piped, would there be a stream and such an issue? And this is one of the properties off of Arbor. I believe it's around 11 or 10 or 8 or so, where the actual property owners have come up with different solutions just to keep the water moving. Pipes are very expensive, so honestly, how many homeowners are gonna get a pipe that's gonna be 150 feet in length to solve a stormwater issue? They're probably not. That's a lot of money and effort. So a lot of these solutions that we're gonna have to look at in the next coming week, we'll actually get into more of the rain gardens and stuff like that next week. What are the solutions that we can use to you know, the more, I don't want to say least expensive, but you know, cost effective approaches that will actually get the job done. You know, we'd hate to, you know, we want to be thorough on this because stormwater is tricky, and I've heard cases where a resident hires somebody and they spent out a bunch of money, and then once they call the city, they're already sick of spending money. So like, you know, I don't want to spend any more money. Please, you know, let the city help me. And I went to this contractor. So that's why we want to take some diligence in looking at these items. In looking at, you know, this is what's called a bioswale, where there's rock and a bit of plants. It might be native plants that help soak into the rock. But these are the types of solutions that probably more than likely will be the solutions that staff, not all of them, but will come up with, because if we were to, you know, connect these pipes, these red lines all together, once you go south, I mean, it's already a floodplain. So we're just making a situation worse for others. So we have to be good, you know, neighbors and stewards. So how do we combine a little bit of common ground or detention that is, you know, I don't know if it's on property easements or what, but we have to slow down and maintain some of this water, at least to get soaked into the ground via bioswale or whatever, but also to, you know, relieve some of the residents' issues. And at that, that's all I have for this evening. Any questions or comments from the commission? All right.
The only thing I'll comment, and I'm glad to hear it, Jonathan, and thank you for this, is I'm glad to hear that it sounds like we're moving towards more kind of solutions, because I'll be honest, all these information, I'm sold. I'm comfortable with the fact that it's a significant concern and something that needs to be addressed. So I'm excited about looking at options moving forward too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to other business, item 6. Do we have any meeting minutes?
I don't believe there was any provided in the packets.
There
Yep.
were.
Oh,
There were.
9/17.
Do I hear? Go ahead, Carol.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to acknowledge receipt of the meeting minutes for September 17th, 2020.
So noted. If there's any corrections, let us know. Otherwise, we'll move on. Let's go to reports. Carlos?
Just a couple. Jonathan took the screen. Oh no, 1 second. Just a couple of items, just traditional items that we keep the commission informed on. Bear with me 1 second here. Oh, there it goes. Thanks, Jonathan. Our next commission date is on October 15th, and then we have I think a 3-week lull before our November 5th meeting, and then the November meetings are the 5th and the 19th, which is the week before the Thanksgiving in there, so I think we're good. And then December are the 3rd and the 17th, and there are no holidays that fall in either of those two, so I think we're good for the next 5 meetings to conclude the year. For council, they're having their next work session this Tuesday on the 6th, and then their council dates are the 13th and the 27th, and then November 3rd would be their work session. They'll have a meeting on the 10th, and then the 24th is on Thanksgiving week, which is a meeting date that they've traditionally canceled. As of yet, I'll let the liaison address that. I don't think a decision's been made. City events, Dealman Road, that closure should have taken place already. There's information on the city's website about the options or alternatives to get around that. We anticipate it's going to be closed for 4 to 6 weeks. What they're doing is they're removing that culvert underneath that bridge section just south of the bike trail. That is going to be removed and replaced. And again, that closure will take place for 4 to 6 weeks. Ashby Road Bridge, for those of you that live or utilize Warson Road, talking with county, they said that should be open by year's end. And they're running behind from the date we were given back in August. Registration's open for the 7th annual Turkey Trot. COVID-19 info and updates. Of course, we're still doing mandatory masks. The Parks Department has opened all restrooms and play equipment, so those are now accessible. And then the court is conducting court virtually via Zoom, just like our meetings now. They did one full court session already and are getting set for their next one. I think is next week. The mayor, Springer, held a Zoom with the mayor on this week on Wednesday, September 29th, or actually it was Tuesday, where she had County Prosecutor Wesley Bell. That Zoom with the mayor is on the city's website. It's pretty interesting and it's worthwhile watching if you have the opportunity to do so. Some events on the 11th and 12th is the community-wide garage sale. October 17th is a drive-in movie at Stacy Park. They're going to be showing The Goonies. You do have to register for the event. October 24th is National Drug Take Back here at the City Center. That will be on a Saturday. Don't forget Election Day, November 3rd. On November 7th here at the City Center grounds, there will be a recycling event for electronic waste, document shredding, and again, prescription drop-offs. That event will take place on a Saturday. I'd urge you on November 10th, Mr. Roper has put together or is coordinating the Zoom with the mayor, where Mayor Springer will have Rob Kennedy of the Missouri Botanical Gardens, where he's going to talk about rain gardening. So it should be a good event. I encourage you to look at those. Those Zooms with the mayor are always great events. And we're trying to get more and more people involved or listen to, and also give them the opportunity to do so afterwards, like we did with the county prosecutor. November 27th, the 2020 census information. Again, we've ticked up a little bit upward, and I think today was, I'm not sure if it was supposed to be the last day or I don't think anybody knows when the last day is anymore. Updates on developments, Olive Crossing, MSD continues their work. They just started on the southern leg of a sanitary lateral extension from 170. That's going to go down south beyond Stoneleigh Towers and then up by the channel on Bond Price Terrace. The northern leg one has already commenced, and that one is going to go and connect to Hilltop and there. So they're supposed to have those completed at the end of October, or what is now this month. Plant Haven Commercial Center, we're still reviewing the plan applications for those. The City Center redevelopment area, we have posted the landscape plans online. I need to bring those, I'll have them at the next commission meeting. And they are pouring, or they've already excavated for their footings on the site. So that's moving along. Easy Storage, they're trying to coordinate some issues that they're having with the county regarding the site and how they're evaluated. But if you saw, the big mound was spread out the past couple of days. So they addressed some of the visual issues the city had as it had looked like it had been kind of abandoned. So, but their intent is still to continue. The Firestone project, they're still moving through the process. They haven't closed on the ownership, but they're getting all their ducks together to get through that. And I think that kind of summarizes all the activities for the city and development. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if there are.
Any questions? That being said, I think we'll proceed on to Missy.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. It is with a great pleasure right now I get to announce that St. Louis is leading 6-2. Bottom of the sixth, you'll all be able to disengage from this and go watch the rest of the ball game and hope we see a winner and get to the next round. Let me just apologize to Carlos for that, but okay. I want to reiterate something that Mr. Trejo did say. The Zoom coffee with the mayor and St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Wesley Bell and the pro tem Mr. Clark, that was a very, very, very good session. So if you do have an opportunity to go back and listen to it, it's got some good information and some good questions were asked. Mr. Bell was totally open and receptive to everything that was there, and it touched on a lot of good things. So, if you have the time, do go ahead and listen to it. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say that I'm glad to see that we, the City of Olivet, like we always are engaged, and we have the best rate for the return of the 2020 census. And I'm going to thank everyone for what they do on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And with that, I really have nothing else to report. I thank you all for everything you do. This was an excellent conversation, discussion tonight. And I look forward to what is finalized and comes to the council for council to further review. Mr. Jurgel, you did a very good job keeping things going to the commission. You've had very good conversation tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I think we're going to adjourn at 9:03. This might be a record during the COVID. So I think this is our good goal, is to try to get all of these meetings, to 2 hours or less.
Your mentor would be proud of you.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. So that's the goal. That's the goal. And Carlos and Jonathan have been very good about trying to keep things moving and keep the agenda to a minimal amount as allowable. So appreciate the extra effort there.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so we'll adjourn. We'll adjourn at 9:03. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everybody be safe, please.
Thank you.